Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today on the Laser Therapy Institute podcast. My name is Dr. Jason Roundtree. I'm a chiropractor and a certified medical laser safety officer. I've been able to say that faster and faster every time.
You are. And it's early in the morning.
It is a little early yet. It is. I'm joined by the fantabulous Christy, who is our VP of online course development. Really, all of our content development. And Christy has a lot of skills, a lot of background in developing courses to make sure that people get educated well and efficiently and correctly. And so she takes all of this that comes out of my face and turns it into actual coursework online. So if you're a doctor looking for more knowledge and more understanding of how to utilize laser therapy in your practice, specifically class 4 laser therapy, please give us a look, because we have a lot of free tools that can help you in practice that we've developed over the years. Calculators, return on investment stuff. We've got a white paper on the market. If you're looking at getting into laser therapy, we've got basic courses you could start right now on our website. There's a lot of great stuff there. In addition, we can provide you with a complete spectrum of services to support your laser therapy practice. Everything from custom settings to protocols, whether it's you're focused on spine or sports injuries, or you want to work on neuropathy, or you want everything, we can help out. So that's my pitch. Please check us out. But today we're talking about 1064 nanometer light.
Nice.
Yes. So if you've been around the light therapy, laser therapy world for a while, you've probably heard about 1064 light. You might be wondering why it's a thing, what it is, and what does even all this wavelength stuff mean. So I wanted to take some time and go through a study today that talks specifically about 1064 light and the effects that it can have. Because one of the biggest things that you need to get right when you are buying a laser therapy device is the wavelength.
Right. It's important. I mean, and you just do that well. You help us understand that well.
Well, I try and just go off of the research. Of course, we've got a lot of clinical experience from using these lasers for many, many years. But the research that shows us hard data is where we really need to live when we're talking about getting the best results for our patients. So this research, the paper we're going off of today, came out in August of 2016, and it is titled Interplay Between Upregulation of Cytochrome C Oxidase and Hemoglobin Oxygenation Induced by Near-Infrared Laser. And this is a really good look, I feel like, at not only the effects of laser therapy or photobiomodulation overall, but it's also a great way to evaluate this 1064 wavelength kind of in isolation, and how does it compare to other wavelengths. So let's real quick define a few things first, because especially if you're new to the laser therapy, the light therapy game, you want to understand kind of what we're talking about when we say wavelength. It is. It's the biggest factor that there is out there for getting your laser purchase correct so that you can actually do good for people. So I need to find the picture. There we go. So this is wavelength right here. Wavelength, when we're talking about that, is simply referring to the distance between the peaks of these waves, right? So shorter wavelength down here on the visible light spectrum, and longer wavelengths as we go up towards radio waves and things like that. Now, if you go short enough, you get into ultraviolet and gamma rays, and those are ionizing wavelengths. We know those do damage to DNA. It promotes cancer. Once you get up into violet and blue lasers, or just light in general, you're out of that ionizing, damaging spectrum. And then as you move further into the red and the infrared and radio and things like that, you move kind of back out, or you stay out of that ionizing zone. So all these infrared wavelengths and visible light wavelengths, as far as we know, are completely safe at this point. Now, you can use really intense light, focused collimated laser light, to burn tissues, no matter what the wavelength is. If you pump the power high enough, you can get a laser that will burn tissues or destroy tissues, overheat tissues.
Oh, and that's like putting light through a magnifying glass.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, so you can still get damage to tissues, direct damage to tissues with these wavelengths, if you go high enough in intensity. But these visible wavelengths, visible light, purple, violet, whatever we're supposed to call it now, blue, green, yellow, red, infrared, they don't have the ionizing potential that you think of when you think of ultraviolet rays, right? Ultraviolet being out in the sun, damaging the tissues,
right?
Causing skin cancer, things like that. That is not what we're talking about when we talk about photobiomodulation and the wavelengths that are used for laser therapy. So simply when we say wavelength, we're really essentially talking about the color of the laser. Is it blue? Is it red? Is it green? Is it infrared? Now you can't see infrared. It's not one of these that's visible to the human eye. You can see it with an infrared camera, right? You can see that. But it's still a color of light. That's the point.
Amazing what light does.
Yeah.
And how it differentiates and
all these different properties, right. and all of it is based on the wavelength. The wavelength on UV rays is so short that and the energy is so high that it produces damage to the DNA, even if you just kind of trickle dose it. That's why being in the sun, you need a UV blocker, right? Whereas as you get a little bit longer wavelengths going towards infrared, you have less energy in those individual photons, so they can't damage the DNA. But you can still get those to have an effect on the tissues, and to do that, you need absorption. The light has to be absorbed if it's going to do something in the tissues.
It just struck me, some light damages things, other light helps repair and promote healing.
Yes.
That's what's incredible through this spectrum.
Yes. And actually we're going to talk a little bit about how exactly certain light can stimulate healing. But yes, it is important to know. I mean, there is a way, to damage tissues with light. And we know that. We've known that for decades. So in this case, of course, we're talking about, light that doesn't damage, light that actually helps to heal. But to have that light help do anything or hurt, it has to be absorbed. Absorption, I want you to think about it like wearing a black t-shirt out on a sunny day. You're going to feel hot, right? You're absorbing. That t-shirt's absorbing the light from the sun.
Right.
If you have a white t-shirt on,
it's reflecting.
It's reflecting, right? You're not having an effect on that t-shirt with the sun's light. So if you want to affect tissues, not just heat them up, but have any effect, it has to be absorbed. So I've got another picture for that one too. Let's see if this is the right one. No. No. Third time's the charm. Okay. So I just like some visual aids. If you're listening to this on the audio only version, I'll do my best to describe it. You can always see these on YouTube or on our Facebook page.
Are they part of the paper?
These are actually not. These I had to pull from elsewhere just to try and explain these ideas a little bit. This paper kind of skips right over a lot of this stuff. And what I found is that unless you're intimately familiar with light and lasers, a quick review on this stuff can be really helpful for setting the stage.
Definitely.
So I pulled these in. Transmission is misspelled on this one, but there's just a few ways that light interacts with tissues. So it can reflect off the tissues and not go in and not have an effect. It can be absorbed in the tissues, and that's having an effect. It can also scatter in the tissues. So before it's absorbed, in many cases, instead of continuing on in a straight line into the tissues, it'll scatter laterally, or all these different directions. And that limits the amount of transmission or light that goes through the tissues. Right? So the more scattering you have, the less transmission you have. Also, the more absorption you have, the less transmission you have, because that light is being absorbed. It's stopping in those tissues where it's being absorbed.
Okay.
So if you have very high absorption of a certain wavelength, like, let's say, blue light, if you have very high absorption, it gets absorbed very quickly the skin.
So it doesn't get down to where it needs to get.
Exactly.
It just gets stopped.
Right.
It's like, comfort.
Right.
Stay
Yep.
here.
Oh, this is nice. I'll stay right here. Yep. It just does not make it any further. Okay. So you need to have this balance between absorption and transmission And scattering even plays a part here too, because if you have more scattering, then you're not going to get that transmission through the tissues. You're going to get some lateral scattering into the superficial tissues, but it doesn't make it as deep as you might be thinking it should.
Right.
So that's our reflection, scattering, absorption, transmission. If you want to know more about that, I did some podcasts on those specific items a year ago or so. Just search the podcast for transmission or absorption, or wavelength even. You'll find some good stuff.
Right.
So I won't belabor that, but I want you to keep this in mind. When you've got these wavelengths that are absorbed quickly at the surface, then you don't get a deeper effect.
Right.
Because in order to have an effect, you have to have absorption of a photon. If you don't get that absorption, you don't get an effect.
Right.
Okay. So, let's look at the absorption of light by water. This is another graph, but just verbally, what I'll tell you is there is not a lot of absorption by water in the visible range. So in that 400 to 700 range, there's a big dip. So there's not a lot of water that absorbs in that range, okay? But as you notice, we start going up into the 900, 1,000, 1,500, and so and it rises quite a bit, all the way up until you get to 2,000, 2,500 nanometers or so. And that's like a ER-YAG, an erbium-YAG laser is about 2940 or so. It has very, very high absorption in water. So it impacts right at the skin, just under the skin surface where you have water content, right? If you come back down and you're closer to that 1,000 spectrum, what you'll notice if you're looking at this graph is that there's this little valley right between 1,000 and 1,100. It's this little dip right there that shows us that there's less water absorption right there than there is at, say, 980. So, there's less water absorption at 1064 than there is at 980. Now, the traditional wavelengths like 660 and 800 and 980 have a lot of research out there on them. But looking at this graph, you can see there's a potential to get more light in deeper because of the little bit lower absorption by water at that 1064 mark as compared to like the 980.
And that's a very narrow margin.
It's a very narrow margin, yes. Now, would 1050 work? Probably. Would 1070 work? Probably. Yeah. But 1064 is about perfect. That's
a sweet spot.
It is kind of a little bit of a sweet spot. Now, this is just water. We're just looking at water absorption. So if you're really looking at this water absorption graph and you're thinking about wavelength, okay, so the more water content, the more gets absorbed at the surface. So the less water absorption we have, the better. So like, how about we go for 500? Well, turns out we have other things to worry about too besides just the water content of the tissues because we're not 100% water.
Right.
Right?
We're a lot of water, but we're not 100%.
Right. Exactly. So we also have to evaluate the content of the skin. And so if we look at the absorption of light by melanin, it is extremely high up at the 400, the violet spectrum, and then decreasing in absorption as you get closer to 700 and then 800. But it continues downward all the way through 1100. Wow. So you overlay those two graphs on each other and you see there's less absorption in the melanin and the water at 1064 than there would be at, say, 600, which would be a visible red-orange at 600. All right. One other thing to look at, which I've got on the graph here too, is oxygenated hemoglobin. Where do you find hemoglobin? In the blood. Yes. So blood's definitely a content, one of the things that we have to worry about if we're using laser to try and drive an effect.
Because laser increases blood flow.
It does. It does increase blood flow. And the more absorption you have in the blood flow, though, it is going to limit how deep you can go. It's useful. It's definitely helpful. But the higher the absorption in blood, the more difficult it is to get that light in deeper.
That makes sense.
Yes.
The blood flows, and it's just going to take what it gets, what it absorbs, and move on.
Right. And it can help the tissues there. And it could help the tissues even at another site. We've seen that many times.
Right.
But if you're saying, well, I don't really care about this person's, minor shoulder pain. We're trying to fix this lumbar disc. We're trying to stimulate that. Then these factors really should matter to you. So you'll notice on this graph, you've got hemoglobin, oxygenated hemoglobin, that is quite varied in how it absorbs light. But it is very low at the 800 spectrum, and then increases up to about that 980 point, and then decreases again, which again, when it comes to 1064, leaves us with kind of an interesting spot. So the 1064 does not get highly absorbed by water. It doesn't get highly absorbed by melanin in the skin, and it doesn't get that highly absorbed by the hemoglobin as well. Those factors there should make you be thinking about, okay, it sounds like we're going to be getting fairly deep.
Right.
With this 1064 light. Getting the laser deep is good, but what did we say about how to have an effect with laser? It has to be absorbed.
Right.
If you can't get it to absorb and do some good, then who cares if you can shine light through the tissues, right? It doesn't matter if you can transmit light through those tissues and reach that disc if it's not going to do anything. So, this study, they wanted to see how 1064 light could affect the tissues. Stand by. I've got a quote for you. So, they say the mechanism of photobiomodulation is proposed to rest on photon absorption by cytochrome C oxidase, which is the terminal enzyme in the mitochondrial respiratory chain that catalyzes the reduction of oxygen for energy metabolism. The more the activity of cytochrome C oxidase increases, the more oxygen consumption and metabolic energy is produced via mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation. Since CCO is an inducible enzyme, meaning you can induce it to change, right? A longer-lasting metabolic effect is achieved by laser therapies upregulating CCO concentration, which in turn enhances this capacity for cellular oxygen metabolism. We are speeding up the rate at which the cells work when it comes to photobiomodulation. So this current study, they applied laser therapy on the forearm of living live humans using a 1064 nanometer laser, and they used near-infrared spectroscopy to get simultaneous assessment of the interplay between photoactivation and upregulation of CCO, cytochrome C oxidase, and alteration of hemoglobin oxygenation on those treated tissues. So, break that down simple. They put the laser on the skin, and they used some spectroscopy to measure the changes in cytochrome C oxidase and the changes in oxygenation of hemoglobin.
Now, is that real time?
That is real time.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. Yes. Now, back in 2016, this was very, very new. So part of this study was that they were kind of proving that this near-infrared spectroscopy works, but it's been used many times since then. We know that it's very accurate. It can actually see the effects of the laser as they're happening. So they said, when it comes to 1064, this wavelength may not be optimal for photon absorption by CCO because its known peaks of light absorption are at lower wavelengths. That means CCO, cytochrome C oxidase, we know that it absorbs light at lower wavelengths, and that's specifically in that red, kind of 660, 670 range, as well as especially the 800 nanometer.
800.
Yep, exactly. You know this. Yeah, the 800 nanometer wavelength. We know that works. That's been studied for so long.
Right.
So we know that's a thing. So they're saying, okay, right up front, we know this may not be ideal. They say, however, none of the previous absorption studies have measured photon absorption by CCO at 1064, and this present study demonstrated a clear effect of this wavelength on CCO upregulation. We'll get back to the results here in just a second. But they go on to say, the primary reason for selecting this wavelength is its ability to better penetrate the human scalp and skull in transcranial applications. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, depression.
Traumatic brain
injury. Exactly. They say in biological tissues, light scattering is the dominant light tissue interaction, and its influence is 2 orders of magnitude greater than that of light absorption. That means if you have a lot of absorption, you also have a lot of scattering. And we said scattering limits your what? Transmission. Yep, your penetration deeper into the tissues. So they say, according to the Me theory, the light scattering in biological tissues decreases with longer wavelengths. So as you go from red at, say, 650 all the way up into 800, you're getting more or less scattering? You're getting less because the wavelength's getting longer. But if we go from 800 to 1064...
you probably get more scattering.
No, because it continues to get longer.
It gets longer and it gets
so
deeper.
You have less scattering. Yes, exactly. So they say that the 1064 wavelength is approximately the longest one in the near-infrared optical window where water absorption remains low. Going back to the water graph I showed you, it's that nice little dip where you don't get a lot of water absorption, which means it can get into the tissues deep without being absorbed as quickly by the water. But also because it's a longer wavelength, it's not scattering out to the side. 800 is pretty bad for scattering out to the side. So even though it transmits very deep into the tissues, you do get more scattering. It's a limiting factor of 800. They go on to say, therefore, 1064 is expected to have better penetration depth and stimulation efficiency in the human brain than shorter wavelengths for transcranial laser treatments. And of course, we can use laser therapy for all kinds of things like pain, and arthritis pain, neuropathy pain. It's great. But some of the most exciting research out there is the transcranial laser therapy for these just difficult to solve problems.
Well, and we've done some recent podcasts on traumatic brain injury and dementia and Alzheimer's. And so this ties into that very well. So obviously go back and listen to those. But this is exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, let's see. I got more quotes for you here. So, anyway, in this study, they used a 1064 laser. It was it had a beam size of 13.6 square centimeters. Power setting was 3.4 watts, which gave it an irradiance or power density of about 0.25 watts per centimeter squared, or 250 milliwatts per centimeter squared. Now that, I think, is important to say, look, this is a class 4 laser that they used, but it is at a large enough spot size that the intensity is fairly low. You're still talking class 3B intensities here at 250 milliwatts per centimeter squared.
So it's not that laser, if you will, beam to cut or damage.
Right, exactly. It's still, even though it's a higher power laser, it is still operating at a zone, where you have a large enough spot size where it is not overwhelming the tissues. Now, it does produce a little bit of warmth, but I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because you'll have a ton of people out there who go, oh, well, class 4 laser doesn't actually work. It only makes people feel better because they feel some warmth. But these guys accounted for that. So I'll come back to that here in just a second. But let me talk to you about the results a little more first. Okay. So they say laser therapy with a 1064 significantly increased the oxygenated hemoglobin and CCO concentrations as compared with placebo, while the deoxygenated hemoglobin concentration was nearly unaltered by either the placebo or the laser treatment. However, the initial laser effect on CCO seemed to precede in time the effect on oxygenated hemoglobin. The laser-induced effect was significantly greater than placebo after 2 minutes of laser treatment. So, initially, that laser effect on cytochrome C oxidase was observed. They saw that rise, and that was eventually followed by a rise in oxygenated hemoglobin as well. So, for CCO, the significant effect started after just 1 minute. Right? So, you see that increase in cytochrome C oxidation after 1 minute of laser. But after that second minute, that's when they saw hemoglobin, oxygenated hemoglobin, also start to rise. Only in the laser group, not on the placebo group. They say, also note the increased CCO concentration showed a slightly faster recovery trend towards baseline than oxygenated hemoglobin, which means that CCO action, as soon as they turned the laser off, did start to drop and drop fairly rapidly, whereas oxygenated hemoglobin had a longer effect before it also started to drop.
Okay.
So there's a difference there. One preceded the other. This is important, though. Both of these are important because you should be providing more oxygen to the tissues with more oxygen and hemoglobin.
Right.
And you're providing more cellular metabolism, more energy produced in the cells. Right? That's why they measured these, because they matter.
So when they dropped, did they drop back to the original level, or did they?
Let me actually
a lower. I mean, drop and then to. You know what I'm trying to say?
I do, and I have a graph for that actually straight from these materials, but I wasn't able to pull it up on the computer. Let me see if I can show everybody the graph. And of course, we're going to upload, or we don't upload, but we'll provide you a link to this study so you can go and read it yourself as well. But here is a graph of the results, and it's going to be a little bit hard to see there. There we go, something like that. The focus is terrible, so what you want to do is look this up. But essentially on the graph, they did not return to baseline. So on the graph, the solid line here is the laser group. You can see they started in the same place and ended in about the same place for laser, whereas with placebo, not so much.
Right. Okay.
Same thing here. So, on the hemoglobin, oxygenated hemoglobin, it actually did stay quite high for a while as they continued to measure it.
Nice.
So there's sustained effects. There's rapid effects, and then there's the sustained effects of doing laser therapy on both the oxygenation of the tissues and the metabolic activity of the tissues. And really, I mean, if you got more oxygen to tissues, what do? They heal. You fight off infection.
Right.
You generate new healthy tissues. If you have increased cellular metabolism, same thing. Your body is able to function more like it's supposed to because you're enabling those functions.
Right.
Now, class 3 lasers, class 2 lasers, lasers with very minimal power, visible lasers, these are all said to have less effect on deeper tissues. We already did say there can be distant effects to laser. You laser blood flow that then goes on to other areas, and that can actually change those other areas. We already talked about that. We know that's a factor. But if you want to affect deep tissues, you need to be able to deliver that light in deep. 1064 is a clear choice that should have good effects, should be able to reach those deep tissues. There have been multiple studies showing very good effects, but we still have a lot of people saying, well, infrared doesn't actually do that much. We still have people saying that these higher powered class 4 lasers are worthless, or they're overwhelming the tissues, or they're just heating the tissues up, and that just makes things feel a little better for a little while. Well, they say it is reasonable to expect that infrared light at 1064 with a power of 3.4 watts would generate some thermal effect. That may lead to an increase in skin blood flow. Such an increase in skin blood flow may give rise to an increase of hemoglobin concentration in the adjacent area. They say, yeah, okay, so if you warm the tissues up, yeah, it could increase blood flow, sure. To address this concern, we conducted an additional study, and the clear observation with that study, where they used a heat element, just an element that produced warmth, in the same manner that the laser did, they said the clear observation was that thermally induced hemoglobin changes, oxygenated hemoglobin changes, followed a similar trend to that of the placebo, while the laser-induced hemoglobin changes remained significantly higher during and after the 8 continuous laser treatments. On the other hand, in the case of change of cytochrome C oxidase, the thermal effect was non-significant, meaning it didn't change the CCO effect, the CCO measurement, while significant increases of CCO were clearly observed due to the laser therapy stimulation. So, boom, there you go. I don't think you have to see any more evidence than that to say that, no, it's not the heat that does the work.
Right.
It's the light that does the work. Right. You might get a little heat. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of warmth. I mean, we're talking like 1 degree Celsius of raising the skin
Very
temperature.
comfortable.
Very comfortable. Very minimal.
Yeah.
So if you're doing class 4 laser therapy and patients always are like, oh, turn it up, I want to feel more heat. No, the heat doesn't do the work. The light does. That's the important part. It doesn't matter if you feel heat or not. It really doesn't.
Right.
But also, if you've got somebody whispering into your ear that, oh, well, it's just class 4 lasers don't work because they're infrared, they don't, they only produce heat. That is clearly not the case. The class 4 lasers produce chemical changes in the tissues, biological changes in the tissues, independent of heat.
You can't refute that. Not when they measure it and see it.
Yeah. And this isn't the only study to say that either. This is they didn't even go about this study to prove that. It was just an observation along the way. Yeah. So it's important to note here, I think, in conclusion, that 1064 holds very good promise. It has shown good results, not only in transcranial photobiomodulation, but also for things like knee pain and shoulder pain. I think it's an important one we're going to see more and more of as we see more and more research. And it's probably one to have in your arsenal as a laser therapy provider. And it's also probably not the best idea to rely on extremely low power or visible lasers to get the job done.
Right. You need multiple wavelengths.
You do.
To be effective across the board. I mean, yes, a single wavelength for specific treatments or conditions, as you know, and as you have researched and do in clinic, we know that works, but having the ability to have multiple wavelengths work together.
It's amazing, really, to be able to have multiple wavelengths. So, I won't say the name of the company, but there's a company that has a class 4 laser with 6 wavelengths. Visible blue, visible red, 800, 905, 970, and 1064. And what that enables you to do as a laser therapy provider is pick and choose what you want. This device also has artificial intelligence that lets it scan the patient's skin and then adjust according to the skin, which is just like mind-boggling, really. Yeah. But that's important too, because if you treat a lot of darker skin patients, then the 1064 does not have the same absorption in melanin. We already covered that, which means that 1064 is going to get deeper through that melanin because it's not absorbed as much. So you're going to be able to accomplish deeper tissue effects in your dark skin patients. Your light skin patients, your super pale people like me, you can use your 800 nanometer and it's going to go right through. But 800 is very absorbed in melanin. So if you have somebody who's a skin type 4 or 5 or 6, it's going to produce more heat and less penetration into the tissues. So 1064 could be a great choice. And I don't mean to say that lower power visible lasers are of no use. They are incredibly beneficial.
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. Absolutely.
There's all kinds of application. But if you're trying to work on a hip joint or even a shoulder, any of these major joints, the spine, you've got to have some of that penetration. You've got to have the right wavelengths to do it that are going to have the effect, that have the deep tissue absorption, the deep tissue penetration capability, if you want to have those really good results.
Right.
What else?
Gosh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
I keep just going back to the brain, because that is, more and more diagnoses of, things with the brain and how we can potentially help.
For sure.
Help that.
I love seeing knee pain tests just as much as the next guy.
Definitely.
I think that's great. But we do have some pretty good medical solutions for things like knee arthritis, severe knee arthritis. A knee replacement can do wonders for it,
In the right time.
In the right time. There's even pain medications that can work fairly well for that. But, not really. But, there's solutions. My point is there's solutions out there. But when you talk about Alzheimer's, there's no solutions. I don't care how many new drugs they've approved. They've approved 2 new medications in the past 2 years. One of which costs us taxpayers $60,000 a year and isn't even proven to work. And another one that, again, isn't even proven to work that they just introduced recently. I don't remember the name of that one. And none of them are actually shown to improve Alzheimer's. They're shown to maybe sort of slow the progression down. Maybe.
Well, and then you think of all the side effects that come along with the medications. So, anyway.
No, I'm fully on board with you there. When you start seeing about, working on transcranial light therapy for things like depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, for some of these diseases that really have terrible options for treatment or no options for treatment. I mean,
well, and the cases have exploded. I mean, the
Yes.
number of cases have exploded, and so when you can offer, hopefully, hope through
Right.
light therapy,
right?
it's worth a try.
Yes,
So,
yes, it is.
if you know someone, or a clinic near you,
Right? Where can they find a clinic near them?
go on the website.
Absolutely.
Info at laser. Or
That's
laser
our email.
therapy-
You can email us too. info@lasertherapyinstitute.org.
Getting tongue tied here.
That's all right. I've done that a couple of times. Or just go to the website, which is just lasertherapyinstitute.org. You can click on the tab labeled clinics and be able to find somebody near you. You can also fill out a little form there. If you don't see somebody near you, we'll try and help you find somebody nearby that can actually provide some level of good care. But you know, if you see the Laser Therapy Institute name on a clinic, those folks have excellent equipment. They have the very best techniques and protocols out there, and they have the full support of multiple other members throughout Laser Therapy Institute's member clinics, as well as myself and Christy. So that's who you want to see for excellent laser therapy. Thanks very much for joining us today. We'll be back in a couple weeks with some more exciting stuff.
Yes.
Oh, and also, we have a webinar. We have a free webinar coming up. I need to talk about that.
Yes.
The webinar is coming up on the 27th at 4 p.m.
I believe it's 4 p.m.
Eastern. I believe it is. Yes. And that is entirely focused on sports med. I'll be joined by the wonderful Dr. Clucci as well to talk about some common sports injuries. We'll be talking ligament sprains, mild traumatic brain injury, and also overuse syndrome. And it is completely free. It's a 1-hour webinar. We'll be doing some treatment demonstrations. We'll be talking about treatment protocols, what to look for, how to really use laser in a sports med practice. And highly encourage you to register, join that.
Yes.
That'll be sponsored by K-Laser USA, but we're very, very pleased to be able to present some of the work that we've done, as well as some of their really excellent equipment. So please come join us. You can sign up on our website. You can sign up on the K-Laser USA website, and you can sign up on our Facebook. There's all kinds of links.
All kinds of links.
Do get on that. It'll be a great webinar.
Yes.